Welcome to South Park's most prescient moments, where the creator's satirical genius accidentally became prophecy. Tonight, we explore how a small Colorado town's animated adventures somehow glimpsed our collective future with uncanny accuracy. From technological revolutions to cultural shifts, political upheavals to social movements, Matt Stone and Trey Parker's satirical observations became tomorrow's headlines. So settle into your covers, like you're preparing for a journey through time itself, and let us drift together through the remarkable instances when South Park's fictional chaos predicted our very real world. Rest easy, and let's begin this prophetic pilgrimage. In the gentle twilight of technological prophecy, where the boundaries between entertainment and exploitation blur like watercolors in rain, South Park's exploration of our digital future began with seemingly innocent observations about how technology transforms human behavior in ways both subtle and profound. The creator's understanding of psychological manipulation, addiction mechanics, and the commodification of human attention would prove remarkably prescient, revealing truths about our relationship with digital systems that we ourselves had not yet fully comprehended. The foundation of South Park's digital predictions lies in their sophisticated understanding of how technology amplifies existing human weaknesses, rather than creating entirely new ones. When the show examined the rise of freemium gaming through the lens of Terrence and Philip's mobile game addiction, it revealed patterns of exploitation that would become endemic throughout the digital entertainment industry. The episode's exploration of how supposedly free entertainment becomes a carefully orchestrated system for extracting money from vulnerable users demonstrated an understanding of psychological manipulation that predated widespread awareness of these issues by several years. The genius of the freemium gaming episode lies not merely in its prediction of specific business models, but in its recognition of how digital platforms would learn to exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities that drive gambling addiction while maintaining the veneer of harmless entertainment. The show's portrayal of how these games use intermittent reinforcement schedules, progress barriers, and social pressure to encourage spending revealed a deep understanding of behavioral psychology that many players, and even some developers, did not fully grasp at the time of the episode's creation. The transformation of Jimmy into an enthusiastic promoter of the new Terrence and Philip mobile game serves as a perfect metaphor for how marketing and user acquisition would evolve in the mobile gaming era. His genuine excitement about the game's free availability masks the sophisticated psychological engineering that makes such games profitable despite their lack of upfront cost. The episode demonstrates how word-of-mouth marketing becomes weaponized when products are designed to create compulsive engagement rather than genuine satisfaction. The most disturbing aspect of the show's freemium gaming prophecy lies in its recognition that these systems would primarily prey upon individuals who lack the financial resources or psychological tools to resist their manipulative mechanics. The episode's portrayal of how the games extract money from players who can least afford such expenses revealed an understanding of how digital platforms would become modern forms of predatory lending, using addiction psychology to separate vulnerable individuals from their limited resources. The irony embedded in South Park's own later release of Phone Destroyer, a freemium game that employed many of the same mechanics criticized in their television episode, demonstrates how even those who understand these systems intellectually can become complicit in their perpetuation when economic incentives align with exploitative practices. This self-referential moment reveals the complex moral landscape surrounding digital entertainment and the difficulty of maintaining ethical standards when competing in markets that reward psychological manipulation. The psychological realism of Stan's father Randy's addiction to the mobile game provides crucial insight into how these platforms would affect adult users differently from their primary target demographic of children and teenagers. Randy's inability to control his spending despite his apparent awareness of the game's manipulative nature demonstrates how addiction mechanics can override rational decision-making, even in supposedly mature adults who should understand the financial consequences of their actions. The episode's exploration of how freemium games create artificial scarcity and time pressure to encourage immediate purchasing decisions predicted the widespread adoption of these tactics across numerous digital platforms beyond gaming. The same psychological principles that make players feel they must purchase upgrades or risk losing progress would eventually influence everything from social media engagement to online shopping to subscription service marketing. The portrayal of how these games create social hierarchies based on spending rather than skill anticipated the broader cultural shift toward pay-to-win mechanics that would fundamentally alter competitive gaming and online social interaction. The episode recognized that when financial investment becomes the primary determinant of success within digital environments, these platforms become less about entertainment or skill development and more about economic inequality made visible and gamified. The long-term implications of South Park's freemium gaming predictions extend beyond individual addiction problems to encompass broader questions about how digital platforms shape social relationships and community formation. When games become primarily vehicles for extracting money rather than creating genuine entertainment value, they fundamentally alter the nature of play itself, transforming what should be leisure activity into a form of labor where players work to generate profit for distant corporate entities. The transition from traditional gaming models based on one-time purchases to ongoing service relationships between players and game companies represents a fundamental shift in how digital entertainment operates as both cultural, product, and economic system. South Park's recognition of this transition revealed an understanding of how technological capabilities would be used not to improve user experience, but to create more sophisticated methods of ongoing revenue extraction. The second major pillar of South Park's digital prophecies emerged through their exploration of artificial intelligence's impact on creative industries, years before such concerns became mainstream cultural anxieties. The Awesome O episode's portrayal of Hollywood executives eager to replace human creativity with automated systems revealed a prescient understanding of how technological capabilities would be deployed to reduce labor costs rather than enhance creative possibilities. The psychological dynamics underlying Cartman's successful deception of the movie executives reveal crucial insights into how artificial intelligence would eventually be marketed and adopted within creative industries. The executives' immediate enthusiasm for what they believe to be an advanced creative robot demonstrates the willingness of industry decision-makers to embrace technological solutions that promise to eliminate human unpredictability and creative autonomy from the production process. The specific nature of the movie ideas generated by Awesome O, with their formulaic plots and derivative concepts, anticipated how AI-generated content would often lack the originality and emotional depth that characterizes the best human creative work. The episode's humor derives from the recognition that much commercial entertainment already follows such predictable patterns that artificial generation might actually improve consistency while eliminating the inconvenient demands and creative aspirations of human artists and writers. The power dynamics revealed through the Awesome O deception demonstrate how artificial intelligence would be used not as a tool to enhance human creativity, but as a weapon to reduce creative workers' bargaining power and job security. The executive's excitement about having an obedient creative partner who never demands better working conditions, creative control, or fair compensation reveals the underlying economic motivations driving AI adoption in creative fields. The episode's exploration of how easily sophisticated industry professionals can be deceived by relatively simple technological theater predicted the broader pattern of AI marketing that would emphasize impressive demonstrations while obscuring the significant limitations and human labor required to make such systems appear functional. The gap between Awesomo's perceived capabilities and Cartman's actual creative limitations mirrors the disconnect between AI marketing promises and practical implementation realities that would emerge decades later. The prescient nature of South Park's AI predictions becomes even more remarkable when considering how accurately they anticipated the specific fears and conflicts that would drive the 2023 writers' and actors' strikes. The episode's portrayal of creative professionals being replaced by automated systems that produce derivative content at lower cost directly parallels the concerns that would eventually bring Hollywood production to a standstill as workers demanded protection from artificial displacement. The psychological impact of the Awesome-O revelation on Butters, who had developed genuine affection for what he believed was an understanding artificial companion, anticipated the complex emotional relationships that humans would develop with AI systems designed to simulate empathy and understanding. The betrayal he experiences when learning the truth about Awesomo's nature reflects broader concerns about how artificial relationships might affect human capacity for authentic connection and emotional development. The third element of South Park's digital revolution prophecy emerged through their recognition that niche interests and seemingly trivial preferences often predict broader cultural and market trends. Butters' innocent comment about preferring Hello Kitty Island Adventure to World of Warcraft seemed like a throwaway joke designed to highlight his outsider status among his male peers. Yet it inadvertently predicted the emergence of alternative gaming markets that would challenge traditional assumptions about genre preferences and target demographics. The 17-year journey from Butters' casual mention to the actual release of a Hello Kitty Island Adventure mobile game demonstrates how cultural products often emerge from the intersection of nostalgia marketing, brand expansion, and the recognition that underserved market segments represent significant economic opportunities. The transformation of what began as a satirical reference into an actual commercial product reveals how intellectual property holders learn to monetize every possible brand extension, no matter how seemingly absurd or niche. The psychological significance of Butters' preference for Hello Kitty over World of Warcraft extends beyond simple gaming choices to encompass broader questions about masculinity, social acceptance, and the courage required to express authentic preferences despite peer pressure and social expectations. His willingness to admit enjoying content that his male peers consider inappropriate demonstrates a form of gender non-conformity that would become increasingly common and accepted as cultural attitudes evolve toward greater acceptance of diverse expressions of identity and interest. The market forces that eventually transformed Butters' fictional preference into actual commercial reality demonstrate how contemporary entertainment companies use data mining, social media monitoring, and cultural trend analysis to identify potential product opportunities that might have been overlooked by traditional market research methods. The ability to track and quantify previously invisible consumer interests creates possibilities for serving niche markets that were economically unfeasible under earlier distribution and marketing models. The broader implications of the Hello Kitty Island Adventure prophecy reveal how South Park's creators understood that authentic representation of diverse interests and preferences, even when initially presented for comedic effect, often reflects genuine consumer demand that existing market structures have failed to recognize or serve effectively. The episode's humor derived not from mocking Butters' preferences, but from highlighting how social pressure prevents people from pursuing activities that might bring them genuine satisfaction and joy. The evolution of gaming culture, from the episode's original airing to the actual game's release, demonstrates how digital distribution platforms and mobile gaming technology would democratize access to diverse forms of gaming, entertainment, while also creating economic incentives for companies to serve increasingly specific and specialized market segments. The same technological capabilities that enable freemium exploitation also create opportunities for authentic expression and community formation around previously marginalized interests and preferences. The intersection of these three digital prophecies reveals South Park's sophisticated understanding of how technological capabilities, economic incentives, and human psychology combine to create cultural and social changes that extend far beyond the immediate technical innovations themselves. Their recognition that digital technology would primarily serve to amplify existing human tendencies rather than fundamentally altering human nature provided a foundation for remarkably accurate predictions about how our digital future would unfold in ways both wonderful and troubling. In the quiet contemplation of these technological prophecies, we begin to understand that South Park's creators possessed not supernatural foresight, but rather an unusually clear-eyed assessment of how human nature interacts with technological possibility. Their digital revolution predictions remind us that the future is not predetermined by technological capability, but shaped by the choices we make about how to deploy new tools in service of either human flourishing or human exploitation, and that the difference between these outcomes often lies in whether we prioritize authentic connection and genuine value creation over the more immediate gratification of profit maximization and psychological manipulation. In the profound depths of digital communications evolution, where the boundary between connection and isolation dissolves into pixels and algorithms, South Park's exploration of social media's psychological impact began with observations that seemed almost quaint at the time, but would prove devastatingly accurate as our collective digital experience unfolded. The show's understanding of how online platforms would transform human interaction, mental health, and the very nature of authentic communication revealed insights that many technology companies themselves seemed reluctant to acknowledge or address. The foundation of South Park's social media prophecies lies in their recognition that digital communication platforms, despite their promise of connecting humanity, would often serve to amplify the worst aspects of human nature, while diminishing our capacity for empathy, nuance, and genuine understanding. The transformation of everyday disagreements into toxic warfare, the reduction of complex human experiences into performative content, and the commodification of personal vulnerability would all emerge as defining characteristics of our digital age. Yet South Park identified these patterns years before they became inescapable aspects of contemporary life. The most psychologically devastating of South Park's social media predictions emerged through Butters' traumatic experience as a hate comment filter, a storyline that anticipated the profound mental health crisis that would accompany widespread social media adoption. His assignment to read and moderate the constant stream of vitriol, harassment, and deliberate cruelty that flows through digital platforms provided a concentrated exposure to human malevolence that no individual psyche should be expected to withstand. Yet his experience mirrors that of countless content moderators, community managers, and ordinary users who find themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of digital hatred. The psychological realism of Butter's gradual breakdown under the weight of constant exposure to concentrated negativity reveals the show's sophisticated understanding of how toxic content affects mental health through mechanisms that extend far beyond simple hurt feelings or social embarrassment. The chronic stress of processing deliberate cruelty, the erosion of faith in human goodness, and the development of hypervigilance and anxiety disorders all manifest in his character arc in ways that would later be documented in research studies examining the mental health impacts of social media use and online harassment. The specific nature of Butter's psychological transformation, from his characteristic optimism and faith in others to a state of naked vulnerability and desperate escape attempts, demonstrates how prolonged exposure to digital toxicity can fundamentally alter personality structure and worldview. His public breakdown, running naked through the streets and attempting to escape through a window, represents the kind of desperate flight response that emerges when psychological defense mechanisms become completely overwhelmed by sustained assault on one's basic assumptions about human nature and social safety. The institutional response to Butter's psychological crisis, treating his breakdown as a personal failure rather than a predictable consequence of an inherently harmful system, anticipated how technology, companies, and society at large would consistently frame the mental health impacts of social media as individual weakness rather than structural problems requiring systemic solutions. The failure to recognize that no human being should be expected to process such concentrated hatred without psychological damage reflects broader patterns of victim blaming that would characterize discussions of digital harassment and online mental health for years to come. The episode's exploration of how hate comment filtering becomes a form of psychological torture disguised as necessary content moderation work predicted the emergence of an entire industry of digital laborers whose job involves absorbing society's worst impulses on behalf of users who remain largely unaware of the human cost of their supposedly clean online experiences. The outsourcing of psychological trauma to vulnerable workers, often in developing countries with fewer labor protections, represents a form of emotional colonialism that the show identified before it became widespread practice. The deeper implications of the hate comment filtering storyline extend beyond individual psychological damage to encompass questions about how digital platforms fundamentally alter the nature of human communication and community formation. When the primary function of social media becomes the generation of engagement through controversy and emotional intensity, rather than genuine connection and mutual understanding, the platforms themselves become engines for producing the very toxicity that requires filtering, creating self-perpetuating cycles of harm that benefit corporate interests while damaging individual and collective mental health. The transformation of Gerald Broflovsky into Skank Hunt 4-2 provides the complementary perspective on social media toxicity, revealing how ordinary individuals become perpetrators of digital cruelty through the psychological dynamics of online anonymity and the addictive nature of provocative behavior. Gerald's evolution from mild-mannered family man to dedicated internet troll demonstrates how digital platforms can unlock and amplify destructive impulses that might otherwise remain dormant or constrained by social accountability and face-to-face interaction. The psychological mechanisms underlying Gerald's transformation into an internet troll reveal the show's understanding of how online anonymity creates opportunities for exploring aspects of personality that would be socially unacceptable in offline contexts. The distance created by digital mediation, combined with the lack of immediate consequences for harmful behavior, enables individuals to experiment with cruelty and manipulation in ways that can become psychologically addictive even when they conflict with the person's stated values and self-image. The specific tactics that Gerald employs as Skankant 4.2, including targeted harassment, doxing, and the deliberate exploitation of personal vulnerabilities, anticipated the sophisticated methods that would become standard practice among internet trolls and online harassment campaigns. His ability to research his targets, identify their psychological weak points, and craft attacks designed to cause maximum emotional damage demonstrates a level of premeditation and malice that transforms casual meanness into systematic psychological warfare. The impact of Gerald's trolling behavior on his family relationships, particularly his marriage to Sheila and his relationship with his children, reveals how online toxicity inevitably bleeds into offline relationships and community connections. The secrecy required to maintain his trolling activities creates distance and dishonesty in his most important relationships, while the psychological changes involved in regularly engaging in cruel behavior affect his capacity for empathy and emotional connection, even when not actively online. The broader community consequences of Gerald's trolling activities, including international diplomatic tensions and threats of war, demonstrate how individual actions in digital spaces can have far-reaching consequences that extend well beyond the immediate targets of harassment. The episode's portrayal of how personal cruelty can escalate into geopolitical crisis anticipated the ways that social media would become a vector for political manipulation, international conflict, and the destabilization of democratic institutions. The second major component of South Park's social media predictions emerged through their early recognition of how digital platforms would transform ordinary people into content creators and performance artists, fundamentally altering the relationship between private experience and public presentation. The rise of influencer culture, parasocial relationships, and the commodification of authentic emotion would all stem from the basic dynamic of social media platforms that reward engagement and performance over genuine connection and authentic expression. The psychological transformation required to succeed as a social media influencer involves learning to view personal experiences, relationships, and emotions as potential content for public consumption, creating a form of existential alienation where authentic experience becomes secondary to its documentation and presentation for audience consumption. The show's early recognition of this dynamic anticipated how social media would fundamentally alter the nature of privacy, authenticity, and emotional intimacy as concepts that previous generations took for granted. The development of parasocial relationships between content creators and their audiences represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of social media culture, creating the illusion of intimate connection while maintaining fundamental asymmetries of knowledge, power, and emotional investment. The audience's sense of knowing and caring for creators who remain essentially strangers creates new forms of emotional vulnerability and dependency that can be exploited for commercial purposes, while providing only simulated rather than genuine social connection. The economic incentives that drive influencer culture inevitably create pressure to manufacture drama, controversy, and emotional intensity for audience consumption, transforming personal struggles and relationship conflicts into entertainment products. The commodification of vulnerability and trauma for social media content represents a fundamental corruption of authentic emotional expression and community support, replacing genuine care and understanding with performance and consumption. The psychological toll of maintaining public personas that may diverge significantly from private reality creates unique forms of identity, confusion, and emotional exhaustion among content creators who must constantly balance authentic self-expression with audience expectations and platform, algorithms that reward specific types of content and engagement. The pressure to maintain consistent output of engaging content can transform creative expression from joyful activity into psychologically demanding labor that requires the suppression of natural emotional rhythms and authentic processing of life experiences. The algorithmic mediation of social relationships through engagement metrics and platform recommendations fundamentally alters how communities form and maintain themselves, creating artificial hierarchies based on follower counts and engagement rates rather than mutual care, shared values, or genuine compatibility. The gamification of social interaction through likes, shares, and comments transforms natural human connection into a competitive performance, where success becomes measured through quantifiable metrics rather than emotional satisfaction or personal growth. The long-term implications of social media's transformation of human communication extend beyond individual psychological effects to encompass broader questions about how digital mediation affects our collective capacity for democracy, empathy, and collaborative problem-solving. When public discourse becomes optimized for engagement rather than understanding, and when community formation becomes mediated by algorithms designed to maximize user retention rather than genuine connection, the social bonds that enable healthy community life become increasingly difficult to form and maintain. The polarization and radicalization that emerge from social media echo chambers and algorithmic content curation create artificial divisions between people who might otherwise find common ground, while the constant exposure to curated content designed to provoke emotional responses makes calm deliberation and nuanced thinking increasingly difficult to sustain. The transformation of social media platforms from communication tools into sophisticated behavior modification systems represents one of the most significant challenges to human agency and democratic self-governance that our species has ever encountered. The commercialization of attention through social media advertising creates economic incentives for platforms to design user experiences that maximize time spent rather than user satisfaction or social benefit, leading to the development of features specifically designed to create anxiety, envy, and compulsive usage patterns. The resulting attention economy transforms human consciousness itself into a commodity to be harvested and sold, creating new forms of alienation and exploitation that previous generations could never have imagined. In the gentle recognition of these social media prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood intuitively what researchers and policymakers are only beginning to acknowledge systematically: that digital communication technologies, despite their enormous potential for positive social change, require careful consideration of their psychological and social impacts if they are to serve human flourishing rather than exploit human vulnerability. The show's early identification of these patterns provides not only entertainment value, but also crucial warnings about the importance of designing digital systems that support rather than undermine our capacity for authentic connection, emotional resilience, and collective wisdom in navigating the challenges that define our shared future in an increasingly connected yet paradoxically isolated world. In the turbulent landscape of American political discourse, where the boundaries between satire and reality have become increasingly indistinguishable, South Park's exploration of political upheaval began with observations that seemed like absurdist comedy but would prove to be remarkably accurate predictions of how democratic institutions, public discourse, and political leadership would evolve in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about governance, civility, and the relationship between entertainment and serious political engagement. The foundation of South Park's political prophecies lies in their recognition that American politics had already begun transforming from a system of policy debate and institutional governance into a form of entertainment media where performance, controversy, and celebrity status would become more important than competence, experience, or adherence to traditional democratic norms. The show's creators understood intuitively that the same cultural forces driving reality television, social media engagement, and celebrity worship would inevitably reshape political participation and leadership selection in ways that would fundamentally alter how democracy functions in practice. The most prescient of South Park's political predictions emerged through their portrayal of Mr. Garrison's transformation into a Trump-like political figure, years before Donald Trump's actual presidential campaign began. The evolution of Garrison, from elementary school teacher to inflammatory political candidate, demonstrated the show's understanding of how individuals with limited qualifications but maximum willingness to violate social norms could capture public attention and political power through the strategic deployment of controversy, resentment, and the promise to destroy existing institutional arrangements. The psychological dynamics underlying Garrison's political rise reveal the show's sophisticated understanding of how authoritarian appeals function within democratic systems, exploiting genuine grievances and social anxieties while offering simple solutions to complex problems that require nuanced understanding and collaborative effort to address effectively. His ability to transform personal inadequacy and professional frustration into political messaging that resonates with voters demonstrates how demagogic leadership emerges from the intersection of individual psychological dysfunction, broader social conditions that create receptiveness to destructive messaging. The specific tactics employed by Garrison in his political campaigns, including deliberate provocation, the targeting of vulnerable populations, and the systematic undermining of institutional authority and expertise, anticipated the methods that would become characteristic of contemporary populist political movements across the democratic world. His willingness to embrace increasingly extreme positions in pursuit of attention and power reveals how political competition can become a race toward the bottom when electoral systems reward controversy over competence, and when media attention becomes more valuable than policy coherence. The transformation of Garrison's classroom into a political platform demonstrates how the politicization of everyday institutions would become a defining characteristic of contemporary American life, with schools, sports organizations, entertainment venues, and even commercial businesses becoming sites of political conflict and ideological struggle. The inability to maintain spaces free from political manipulation reflects broader patterns of democratic decay that occur when political competition becomes total and when no aspect of social life remains exempt from partisan warfare. The international implications of Garrison's domestic political success, particularly his interactions with foreign leaders and his impact on diplomatic relationships, anticipated how American political dysfunction would have global consequences and how the erosion of democratic norms in the United States would affect international stability and cooperation. The episode's portrayal of how domestic political theater can escalate into genuine international conflict reveals the dangerous interconnections between local political dynamics and global security in an increasingly connected world. The Canadian immigration storyline that preceded Trump's actual political rise provides even more specific evidence of South Park's prophetic capabilities, with the portrayal of a Trump-like figure building walls and promoting divisive nationalism serving as almost exact preview of campaign themes and policy proposals that would emerge in American politics years later. The refugees fleeing Canadian Trump's authoritarian policies serve as metaphor for how political extremism creates human displacement and suffering that extends far beyond the immediate political context. The wall-building obsession that characterizes both the Canadian Trump and later Garrison's political messaging anticipated how immigration policy would become the central organizing principle for contemporary right-wing political movements, transforming complex questions of economic policy, cultural integration, and international cooperation into simple narratives about walls, barriers, and exclusion. The psychological appeal of physical barriers as solutions to abstract social problems reveals how authoritarian politics exploits human needs for security and simplicity in the face of overwhelming complexity and change. The second major component of South Park's political predictions emerged through their early recognition of how social media and digital communication would transform political discourse and democratic participation in ways that would make traditional forms of political engagement and institutional governance increasingly difficult to maintain. The portrayal of Twitter warfare and inflammatory presidential communication anticipated the specific ways that digital platforms would be weaponized for political manipulation, and how traditional diplomatic and governance protocols would be abandoned in favor of direct, unfiltered communication that prioritizes emotional impact over accuracy or constructive engagement. The psychological dynamics of Twitter-based political communication, with its emphasis on brevity, immediacy, and emotional intensity, represent a fundamental departure from the deliberative processes that democratic governance requires to function effectively. The transformation of complex policy questions into inflammatory social media posts demonstrates how digital communication formats can corrupt political discourse by making nuanced discussion and collaborative problem-solving practically impossible, while rewarding the most extreme and divisive voices with increased attention and influence. The normalization of presidential behavior that would have been considered completely unacceptable in previous political eras reflects broader patterns of institutional decay that occur when political leadership abandons traditional norms and constraints in pursuit of short-term tactical advantage. The episode's portrayal of how quickly political discourse can degenerate when authority figures model inappropriate behavior anticipated the speed with which democratic norms can erode when they lack formal enforcement mechanisms and depend on voluntary compliance with unwritten rules and expectations. The international implications of unhinged presidential communication, particularly the threats directed toward North Korea and other foreign nations, demonstrate how domestic political dysfunction can create genuine security risks and diplomatic crises that extend far beyond the immediate political context. The transformation of international relations from carefully managed diplomatic processes into reality television drama represents one of the most dangerous aspects of political entertainment culture's influence on governance and policymaking. The third element of South Park's political prophecies emerged through their exploration of voter apathy, disillusionment, and the psychological dynamics that lead citizens to disengage from democratic participation, even when such participation becomes increasingly crucial for maintaining democratic institutions and protecting vulnerable populations from authoritarian overreach. Stan's famous choice between giant douche and turd sandwich became a perfect metaphor for how many Americans would come to view electoral politics as a choice between unsatisfactory alternatives rather than genuine opportunities for positive change. The psychological realism of Stan's reluctance to participate in voting reflects genuine concerns about the quality of available political options and the perceived meaninglessness of individual participation in systems that seem dominated by special interests, partisan manipulation, and institutional inertia. His initial belief that his vote doesn't matter captures the sense of powerlessness that many citizens experience when confronting complex political systems that seem designed to limit rather than facilitate meaningful democratic participation. The educational response to Stan's voter apathy, emphasizing the importance of participation regardless of outcomes, anticipated how civic education and democratic advocacy would need to evolve to address widespread disillusionment with political institutions while maintaining commitment to democratic processes and collective decision-making. The recognition that voting represents a civic duty that transcends individual satisfaction with available options reflects mature understanding of how democratic systems require sustained participation even when they fail to meet all participants' preferences and expectations. The broader implications of the voting episode extend beyond individual political participation to encompass questions about how democratic systems can maintain legitimacy and effectiveness when citizens lose faith in institutions and when political competition becomes primarily about mobilizing existing supporters rather than persuading undecided voters through policy discussion and competence demonstration. The challenge of maintaining democratic governance when politics becomes primarily tribal identity rather than policy preference represents one of the most serious threats to continued democratic stability. The long-term consequences of political disillusionment and voter apathy create vulnerability to authoritarian manipulation and institutional capture by extremist movements that exploit democratic processes to gain power while having no commitment to maintaining democratic norms and institutions once they achieve control. The historical pattern of democratic backsliding often begins with widespread cynicism and disengagement that creates opportunities for anti-democratic forces to consolidate power while facing minimal organized resistance from civil society. The role of media and information systems in shaping political participation and democratic discourse represents another crucial element of South Park's political predictions. With their early recognition that news media would become increasingly partisan and entertainment-focused, rather than serving traditional functions of information, provision, and government accountability. The transformation of journalism into opinion programming and political theater creates conditions where citizens struggle to access reliable information necessary for informed democratic participation. The polarization of information ecosystems creates situations where citizens with different political preferences increasingly inhabit completely separate factual universes, making democratic deliberation and compromise practically impossible when participants cannot agree on basic empirical questions about policy outcomes and social conditions. The epistemological crisis created by competing information systems represents one of the most fundamental challenges to democratic governance in the digital age. In the quiet contemplation of these political prophecies, we recognize that South Park's creators possessed unusual insight into how cultural trends and technological capabilities would interact with human psychology and institutional structures to produce political changes that seemed impossible until they became inevitable. Their political predictions remind us that democratic institutions require active maintenance and that the norms and practices that enable effective governance can deteriorate rapidly when they are not consciously protected and renewed by each generation of citizens who inherit responsibility for preserving and improving democratic systems for future generations who will face their own challenges in maintaining freedom and justice in an uncertain world. In the vast cathedral of corporate power, where human dignity becomes subordinated to efficiency metrics and profit maximization. South Park's exploration of economic transformation began with observations about how technological advancement and market consolidation would fundamentally reshape the relationship between workers and employers, consumers and corporations, in ways that would challenge basic assumptions about human worth, labor rights, and the social responsibilities of business enterprises in democratic societies. The foundation of South Park's corporate prophecies lies in their recognition that technological capabilities would be deployed primarily to increase corporate control and reduce labor costs, rather than to improve working conditions or enhance human potential, creating systems where workers become increasingly expendable and vulnerable, while corporate power becomes more concentrated and unaccountable. The show's understanding of how automation, surveillance, and algorithmic management would transform workplaces anticipated the emergence of employment relationships that prioritize machine efficiency over human well-being. The most psychologically devastating of South Park's corporate predictions emerged through their portrayal of Amazon's fulfillment center operations, where the transformation of Josh into a literal box serves as perfect metaphor for how modern industrial systems reduce human beings to interchangeable components in mechanical processes that prioritize speed and cost reduction over worker safety, dignity, and psychological health. The accident that crushes Josh into a cube while he somehow survives represents the ultimate expression of how corporate systems can simultaneously destroy workers' humanity while maintaining their utility for productive purposes. The specific circumstances surrounding Josh's transformation reveal the show's sophisticated understanding of how workplace accidents in highly automated environments often result from the interaction between human workers. Robotic systems designed with insufficient consideration for human safety and well-being. The pressure to maintain productivity quotas and efficiency standards creates conditions where workers must operate at speeds and in configurations that inevitably lead to injuries, disabilities, and deaths that are treated as acceptable costs of doing business rather than preventable tragedies requiring systematic reform. The psychological realism of Josh's response to his physical transformation, accepting his new cubic form, while continuing to articulate critiques of capitalist labor relations, demonstrates how workers often internalize the dehumanizing aspects of their employment while maintaining intellectual awareness of their exploitation. His ability to continue functioning as both worker and critic, while literally embodied as a shipping container, reveals the profound adaptability required of modern workers, who must psychologically accommodate increasingly inhumane working conditions. The broader workforce's reaction to Josh's transformation, treating his accident as catalyst for labor organizing rather than individual tragedy, anticipated how workplace safety issues would become focal points for broader discussions about worker rights, corporate responsibility, and the social costs of prioritizing efficiency over human welfare. The recognition that individual accidents represent systemic problems requiring collective response reflects growing awareness among workers that personal safety and dignity require organized political action rather than individual accommodation to dangerous working conditions. The corporate response to Josh's accident and the subsequent labor unrest demonstrates how companies typically frame workplace safety issues as isolated incidents requiring minimal policy adjustments, rather than evidence of fundamental problems with production systems that prioritize profit over worker well-being. The tendency to blame individual workers for system failures while maintaining operational procedures that guarantee future accidents represents a form of institutional gaslighting that protects corporate interests while leaving workers vulnerable to continued harm. The episode's exploration of how robotic automation creates new forms of workplace danger anticipated the real-world emergence of Amazon warehouse injuries and deaths involving automated systems that were designed without adequate consideration for human-machine interaction. Safety. The integration of robotic systems into workplaces without corresponding investments in worker training, safety equipment, and operational protocols creates conditions where technological advancement becomes a source of increased rather than decreased workplace danger. The broader implications of the Amazon accident storyline extend beyond immediate workplace safety concerns to encompass questions about how technological advancement affects the social contract between employers and employees, and between corporations and the communities that provide their workforce. When companies prioritize technological efficiency over worker welfare, they fundamentally alter the nature of employment, from mutually beneficial relationship to exploitative extraction that treats human labor as disposable input rather than valuable partnership. The psychological impact of working in environments where accidents like Josh's transformation are possible creates chronic stress and anxiety among workers who must daily confront the reality that their employers view their safety and well-being as secondary considerations to operational efficiency and cost control. The knowledge that management considers worker injuries acceptable losses in pursuit of productivity goals fundamentally undermines trust and cooperation that healthy workplaces require to function effectively. The second major component of South Park's economic transformation predictions emerged through their exploration of how previously illegal markets would be legalized and commercialized in ways that would transform underground economies into legitimate business opportunities while raising complex questions about social justice, public health, and the relationship between individual freedom and collective responsibility. The transformation of Randy Marsh from recreational marijuana user to industry mogul demonstrates the show's understanding of how legalization movements often become co-opted by entrepreneurial interests that may have little connection to the social justice concerns and personal freedom, arguments that originally motivated policy reform. Randy's evolution from someone seeking personal access to cannabis into a business owner prioritizing profit maximization reveals how market forces can corrupt the idealistic motivations that drive social change movements. The psychological dynamics underlying Randy's business success in the marijuana industry reveal patterns that would become characteristic of newly legal cannabis markets, where early entrepreneurs, with access to capital and political connections, gain significant advantages over individuals and communities that bore the costs of prohibition enforcement. The transformation of cannabis cultivation from illegal activity, requiring community solidarity and mutual aid, into competitive business, requiring market strategy and capital investment, represents a fundamental shift in how these activities affect social relationships and community development. The specific business practices that Randy employs to build his cannabis empire, including land acquisition, product branding, and market expansion, anticipated how legalization would create opportunities for large-scale commercial operations that could potentially displace smaller producers and community-based distribution networks that had sustained cannabis culture during prohibition. The industrialization of cannabis production raises questions about how legalization affects product quality, environmental sustainability, and the preservation of cultural knowledge and practices developed during underground periods. The impact of Randy's cannabis business on his family relationships, particularly his marriage to Sharon and his relationship with his children, demonstrates how entrepreneurial success can create new forms of family stress and dysfunction, even when the underlying business activity is legal and socially acceptable. The time, energy, and emotional investment required for business development can compromise personal relationships and community connections that provide meaning and satisfaction beyond financial success. The broader community consequences of cannabis commercialization, including changes in local economics, demographics, and social dynamics, reveal how policy changes that seem narrowly focused on individual freedom can have far-reaching effects on community character and social organization. The transformation of rural agricultural communities into cannabis production centers creates economic opportunities, while also potentially displacing traditional economic activities and social relationships that had previously defined community identity and cohesion. The regulatory framework that emerges around legal cannabis markets, with its complex licensing requirements, taxation structures, and quality control standards, demonstrates how legalization often creates new forms of bureaucratic control and market barriers that can exclude individuals and communities that lack access to capital, legal expertise, and political influence. The irony that legalization can create new forms of exclusion and inequality while ostensibly expanding freedom and opportunity reflects broader patterns of how policy reforms often benefit those who are already privileged while failing to address underlying injustices that motivated reform efforts. The environmental implications of large-scale cannabis production, including water usage, energy consumption, and chemical inputs, reveal how commercialization can transform sustainable artisanal practices into industrial operations that may have significant ecological impacts. The pressure to maximize yields and minimize costs in competitive markets creates incentives for production methods that may compromise environmental stewardship and long-term sustainability of cannabis cultivation. The cultural changes that accompany cannabis commercialization, including the transformation of consumption from community ritual into individual consumer choice, represent broader shifts in how social practices evolve when they move from underground subcultures into mainstream commercial markets. The loss of community solidarity and shared risk that characterized cannabis culture during Prohibition reflects how legalization can simultaneously expand access while diminishing the social bonds and cultural meanings that originally made these activities valuable to participants. The international implications of cannabis legalization in specific jurisdictions create complex legal and diplomatic challenges. When previously uniform international prohibition regimes become fragmented by jurisdictional policy differences, the tension between local, democratically determined policy changes and international treaty obligations reveals how drug policy reform requires coordination across multiple levels of governance and legal authority. The long-term consequences of cannabis commercialization for public health, criminal justice, and social equity remain complex and contested, with evidence suggesting both benefits and costs that vary significantly across different communities and demographic groups. The challenge of developing regulatory frameworks that maximize benefits while minimizing harms requires ongoing research, policy experimentation, and community engagement that goes far beyond simple legalization decisions. The intersection of cannabis commercialization with broader trends toward corporate consolidation and market concentration raises questions about whether newly legal markets will develop competitive structures that serve consumer interests and social goals, or whether they will become dominated by large corporations that prioritize profit maximization over social responsibility and community benefit. The potential for corporate capture of cannabis markets reflects broader concerns about how economic inequality and corporate power affect policy, implementation, and democratic governance. In the gentle recognition of these corporate transformation prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that technological and policy changes, however promising they may appear in theory, are inevitably shaped by existing power structures and economic interests that may corrupt their implementation and limit their benefits for ordinary people and communities. Their economic predictions remind us that progress requires not only good intentions and sound policies, but also sustained vigilance and organized effort to ensure that changes serve human flourishing rather than simply creating new opportunities for exploitation and inequality in forms that may be more difficult to recognize and resist than previous arrangements that were obviously unjust. In the shimmering landscape of entertainment evolution, where the boundaries between creator and audience dissolve into algorithmic streams of infinite content, South Park's exploration of media transformation began with observations about how technological disruption would fundamentally reshape not only how entertainment is produced and distributed, but also how audiences relate to performers, how fame operates as both blessing and curse, and how the very nature of celebrity would evolve in ways that would challenge traditional assumptions about privacy, authenticity, and the psychological costs of public life. The foundation of South Park's entertainment industry prophecies lies in their recognition that digital platforms would democratize content creation, while simultaneously creating new forms of exploitation and psychological pressure for both creators and consumers. The show's understanding of how streaming services, social media platforms, and algorithm-driven recommendation systems would transform entertainment from appointment television and theatrical experiences into personalized, on-demand content streams anticipated the emergence of viewing behaviors and production strategies that would fundamentally alter how stories are told and consumed. The psychological dynamics of platform-specific content creation reveal how streaming services would develop distinctive aesthetic and narrative approaches designed to optimize engagement metrics rather than artistic expression or audience satisfaction. The pressure to create binge-worthy content that keeps viewers continuously engaged transforms storytelling from discrete artistic experiences into addictive consumption patterns that prioritize quantity and retention over quality and bade meaningful impact. The algorithmic mediation of content discovery creates feedback loops where successful content gets replicated and variations become increasingly narrow and formulaic. The economic incentives driving streaming platform competition create pressure for exclusive content that fragments audience attention across multiple subscription services, transforming entertainment consumption from shared cultural experiences into individualized market relationships. The proliferation of platforms creates consumer fatigue and decision paralysis, while increasing overall costs for viewers who must navigate complex subscription ecosystems to access desired content. The winner take all economics of platform competition, prioritize market domination over content quality or creator compensation. The impact of streaming services on traditional entertainment industry employment patterns demonstrates how technological disruption affects creative workers through increased competition, reduced job security, and pressure to adapt to new production methods and audience expectations. The democratization of content creation provides opportunities for previously excluded voices, while simultaneously flooding markets with content that makes individual recognition and sustainable careers increasingly difficult to achieve. The gig economy model that characterizes much streaming content production eliminates traditional employment protections and benefits that sustained creative careers under previous industry structures. The algorithm-driven nature of content recommendation systems creates new forms of cultural homogenization where diverse artistic expression becomes subordinated to engagement, optimization, and demographic targeting. The personalization of entertainment experiences reduces opportunities for shared cultural reference points and serendipitous discovery of challenging or unfamiliar content. The data mining capabilities of streaming platforms enable unprecedented surveillance of viewing behaviors that can be used for commercial manipulation and political influence in ways that viewers may not fully understand or consent to. The second major component of South Park's entertainment predictions emerged through their prescient understanding of how celebrity culture would evolve under the pressure of social media attention and 24-hour news, cycles that would transform public figures into content, sources for perpetual consumption, rather than artists or performers with discrete projects and private lives. The Britney Spears episode's exploration of celebrity mental health crisis and media exploitation anticipated the broader pattern of how entertainment media would increasingly focus on celebrity dysfunction and personal tragedy as primary content rather than artistic achievement or cultural contribution. The paparazzi swarm that surrounds Britney in the episode represents the dehumanizing aspects of celebrity culture that treat famous individuals as commodities for public consumption rather than human beings deserving of dignity and privacy. The specific mechanisms of celebrity exploitation portrayed in the episode, including the deliberate provocation of unstable behavior and the profit-driven amplification of personal crisis, demonstrate how media attention can become a form of systematic abuse that destroys the psychological health of public figures while generating revenue for media companies and entertainment for audiences who may not fully recognize their complicity in harmful systems. The transformation of celebrity suffering into entertainment content reveals the sadistic dimensions of contemporary fame culture. The prediction of Miley Cyrus's controversial transformation from child star to provocative adult performer demonstrates the show's understanding of how young celebrities navigate the transition from childhood to adulthood under public scrutiny that makes normal developmental processes impossible. The pressure to maintain public interest and relevance creates incentives for increasingly extreme behavior and image transformation that may conflict with authentic personal development and psychological health. The cyclical nature of celebrity rise and fall, with new young performers being identified and promoted to replace those who have been destroyed by fame, reveals how the entertainment industry systematically exploits vulnerability and innocence while discarding individuals who have been damaged by the celebrity creation process. The industrial production of celebrities as disposable content sources reflects broader patterns of exploitation that characterize entertainment industry-labor relations. The psychological impact of constant public scrutiny on celebrity mental health creates conditions where normal human responses to stress, disappointment, and personal crisis become public spectacles that generate additional pressure and trauma. The inability to process difficult experiences privately and authentically undermines psychological resilience and recovery, while providing ongoing content for media consumption that profits from celebrity suffering. The third element of South Park's entertainment prophecies emerged through their early recognition of how workplace misconduct and power abuse would become central concerns within creative industries that had previously operated with minimal oversight and accountability for the behavior of powerful figures. The sexual harassment panda episode's exploration of inappropriate workplace behavior anticipated the emergence of systematic efforts to address sexual misconduct in entertainment industries where power imbalances and career dependency create vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. The initial presentation of harassment education through a cartoon panda character reflects how institutional responses to serious problems often begin with superficial educational initiatives that fail to address underlying power, structures, and cultural patterns that enable misconduct. The evolution of the harassment awareness campaign into legal litigation and institutional disruption demonstrates how addressing misconduct requires systematic changes in power structures rather than simply educational programming or policy statements. The transformation of individual complaints into broader institutional accountability reflects the collective action necessary to create meaningful change in industries where individual victims face significant professional and personal risks for speaking out against powerful perpetrators. The psychological dynamics of reporting and responding to workplace misconduct reveal how victims often face secondary victimization through institutional processes that prioritize protecting organizations and powerful individuals over supporting those who have been harmed. The tendency to blame victims or minimize the significance of misconduct reflects broader cultural patterns that excuse abusive behavior when it is perpetrated by individuals with economic or social power. The long-term consequences of misconduct, revelations for industry culture and employment practices, demonstrate how addressing systematic abuse requires ongoing commitment to cultural change rather than simply removing specific perpetrators or implementing new policies. The challenge of creating safe and equitable working environments requires sustained effort to transform power, relationships, and accountability mechanisms that have historically protected abusive individuals while silencing their victims. The intersection of misconduct accountability with broader questions of artistic merit and cultural legacy reveals complex tensions between holding individuals responsible for harmful behavior while preserving valuable creative works and cultural contributions that may be associated with problematic figures. The difficulty of separating artistic achievement from personal conduct reflects broader questions about how societies should respond to wrongdoing by influential cultural figures. The technological dimensions of contemporary misconduct accountability, including social media campaigns and digital evidence preservation, create new opportunities for victims to organize and share their experiences, while also creating new risks for false accusations and trial by social media that may not provide adequate due process protections. The democratization of accountability processes through digital platforms represents both progress in addressing previously hidden abuse and new challenges in ensuring fairness and accuracy in misconduct allegations. The economic implications of misconduct accountability for entertainment industry employment and project development demonstrate how addressing abuse requires accepting financial costs and production delays that may affect innocent workers and creative projects. The challenge of balancing accountability with economic sustainability requires industry-wide cooperation and shared commitment to cultural change that goes beyond individual company policies or public relations responses. The cultural impact of entertainment industry misconduct revelations extends beyond specific industries to influence broader social conversations about consent, power, and appropriate behavior in various professional and personal contexts. The visibility of entertainment industry accountability efforts creates models and expectations that affect other industries and social institutions, while also generating backlash and resistance from those who benefit from existing power structures. In the quiet contemplation of these entertainment transformation prophecies, we recognize that South Park's creators understood that technological and social changes in media and celebrity culture would amplify both the positive and negative aspects of human nature while creating new forms of vulnerability and exploitation that would require conscious effort and institutional reform to address effectively. Their entertainment predictions remind us that progress in creative industries requires not only technological innovation and market competition, but also sustained commitment to treating artists, performers, and audiences as human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and protection from exploitation and harm, whether that comes from corporate systems, celebrity culture, or the darker impulses that entertainment can either challenge or enable in both creators and consumers who participate in shaping our shared cultural landscape. In the delicate intersection of scientific advancement and human vulnerability, where the promise of technological solutions meets the complexity of biological reality and social behavior, South Park's exploration of health and science prophecies began with observations about how public health crises, surveillance technology, and genetic engineering would challenge fundamental assumptions about individual autonomy, collective responsibility, and the relationship between scientific expertise and democratic decision-making in increasingly complex and interconnected global systems. The foundation of South Park's health and science predictions lies in their recognition that public health emergencies would become vehicles for broader political and cultural conflicts, rather than opportunities for collaborative problem-solving based on scientific evidence and shared concern for collective well-being. The show's understanding of how health crises would be politicized, how scientific expertise would be challenged by ideological considerations, and how individual behavior would be shaped more by social identity than rational risk assessment, anticipated many of the patterns that would emerge during actual pandemic responses. The psychological dynamics underlying public health policy implementation reveal how individual compliance with collective health measures depends not only on understanding of scientific evidence, but also on trust in institutions, social identity considerations, and the perceived legitimacy of government authority. The polarization of health behaviors along political and cultural lines demonstrates how public health becomes entangled with broader questions of individual freedom, social solidarity, and the appropriate scope of government intervention in personal decision-making. The specific mechanisms through which health misinformation spreads and gains credibility reveal the show's understanding of how conspiracy theories and alternative explanations for complex phenomena can provide psychological comfort and social belonging for individuals who feel alienated from mainstream institutions and expert authority. The appeal of simple explanations for complicated health issues reflects genuine human needs for understanding and control that may not be adequately addressed by technical scientific communication and institutional health messaging. The economic dimensions of public health policy implementation demonstrate how health interventions affect different communities and economic groups unequally, creating tensions between collective health goals and individual economic survival that may not be adequately recognized or addressed by policymakers who focus primarily on epidemiological considerations rather than broader social and economic impacts. The challenge of maintaining public health measures that require economic sacrifice reveals how health policy cannot be separated from economic policy and social support systems. The international implications of health policy differences create complex challenges when disease transmission crosses borders and when different jurisdictions adopt incompatible approaches to public health interventions. The tension between local democratic decision-making and global health coordination reflects broader challenges of governance in an interconnected world, where local actions have global consequences and where international cooperation requires balancing national sovereignty with collective responsibility. The long-term psychological and social consequences of extended public health emergencies include changes in social behavior, mental health impacts, and shifts in institutional trust that may persist long after immediate health threats have been resolved. The normalization of surveillance, social distancing, and government intervention in personal behavior creates precedents that may affect future policy responses and social expectations in ways that extend beyond specific health contexts. The second major component of South Park's health and science prophecies emerged through their early recognition of how surveillance technology would be deployed for law enforcement and social control purposes under the guise of public safety and security, creating systems where civilian privacy and autonomy become subordinated to institutional monitoring and control capabilities that may exceed their stated purposes and democratic oversight. The drone warfare episode's exploration of escalating surveillance and automated enforcement demonstrates the show's understanding of how technological capabilities would be deployed to extend government and corporate monitoring into previously private spaces and activities. The transformation of recreational drone use into security threats requiring military-style responses reveals how civilian technologies become militarized when institutional paranoia and control imperatives override proportional risk, assessment, and civil liberties considerations. The specific dynamics of civilian versus government drone conflicts anticipated real-world policy challenges around airspace regulation, privacy protection, and the balance between individual freedom and collective security in contexts where technological capabilities enable new forms of both liberation and oppression. The arms race mentality that emerges between civilian drone users and law enforcement responses demonstrates how technological development can create escalating cycles of surveillance and counter-surveillance that undermine rather than enhance community safety and social trust. The psychological impact of living under constant surveillance creates changes in behavior and social interaction that extend beyond immediate compliance with regulations to encompass broader shifts in privacy expectations and social spontaneity. The internalization of surveillance as normal aspect of contemporary life represents fundamental change in human experience that may affect creativity, intimacy, and authentic self-expression in ways that are difficult to measure, but significant for individual and collective well-being. The economic incentives driving surveillance technology development and deployment create market pressures that prioritize expanding monitoring capabilities over protecting privacy and civil liberties, leading to technological systems that are designed to maximize data collection and analysis rather than serve specific, legitimate security needs. The commercialization of surveillance creates conflicts of interest where technology companies profit from expanded monitoring while bearing little responsibility for the social and psychological costs of pervasive surveillance systems. The international implications of surveillance technology export and sharing create opportunities for authoritarian regimes to enhance their population control capabilities, using technologies developed in democratic societies, raising questions about corporate responsibility and democratic governance in global technology markets. The difficulty of controlling surveillance technology proliferation reflects broader challenges of managing dual-use technologies that can serve both legitimate security purposes and oppressive population control, depending on how they are deployed and regulated. The third element of South Park's science prophecies emerged through their exploration of genetic engineering and biotechnology developments that would raise complex ethical questions about human enhancement, environmental manipulation, and corporate control over biological processes that have traditionally been governed by natural selection and ecological balance. The various science-based episodes that touch on genetic manipulation and biological modification anticipated how biotechnology advances would create opportunities for both beneficial medical treatments and potentially harmful interventions that could have unintended consequences for individual health and environmental stability. The promise of genetic engineering to solve medical problems and enhance human capabilities creates pressure for rapid development and deployment that may not adequately account for long-term risks and ethical considerations. The corporate control of genetic engineering technologies raises questions about who benefits from biotechnology advances and whether such powerful capabilities should be governed by market forces or democratic institutions that can consider broader social implications and ethical concerns. The patenting of genetic sequences and biological processes transforms natural phenomena into intellectual property that can be owned and controlled by private entities, potentially limiting access to beneficial treatments and creating new forms of inequality based on genetic advantages. The environmental implications of genetic engineering include both potential benefits for sustainable agriculture and environmental restoration, and risks of unintended ecological consequences from releasing modified organisms into complex natural systems. The difficulty of predicting long-term environmental impacts of genetic modifications reflects broader challenges of managing powerful technologies that affect interconnected natural systems in ways that may not become apparent until extensive deployment has already occurred. The democratization of genetic engineering technologies through reduced costs and simplified techniques creates opportunities for beneficial innovation, while also raising concerns about unregulated experimentation and potential misuse by individuals or organizations that lack adequate training and oversight. The availability of genetic engineering tools to non-expert users reflects broader patterns of technological democratization that can empower beneficial innovation, while creating new risks that may be difficult to anticipate and regulate. The ethical frameworks for evaluating genetic engineering applications require consideration of complex questions about human nature, natural rights, and intergenerational responsibility that may not be adequately addressed by existing regulatory systems designed for conventional technologies and medical treatments. The challenge of developing appropriate oversight for genetic engineering reflects broader difficulties in governing emerging technologies that have far-reaching implications for human society and natural environments. The public engagement with genetic engineering science reveals significant gaps between technical expertise and public understanding that create opportunities for misinformation and fear-based decision-making about biotechnology, policies, and applications. The complexity of genetic engineering science makes democratic oversight challenging, while expert-driven decision-making may not adequately reflect public values and concerns about appropriate uses of such powerful technologies. The intersection of genetic engineering with existing healthcare systems and insurance frameworks creates questions about access, affordability, and equity in medical applications of biotechnology that may exacerbate rather than reduce health disparities if not carefully managed through policy interventions that prioritize public benefit over private profit. The potential for genetic enhancement to create new forms of biological inequality requires proactive consideration of how biotechnology advances can serve justice and equality rather than reinforcing or amplifying existing social divisions. In the gentle recognition of these health and science prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that technological and scientific advances, however promising they may appear for solving human problems and improving quality of life, inevitably raise complex questions about power, equity, and democratic governance that require sustained public engagement and institutional innovation to address effectively. Their science predictions remind us that progress requires not only technical innovation and scientific knowledge, but also wisdom, humility, and commitment to ensuring that powerful new capabilities serve human flourishing and environmental sustainability, rather than creating new forms of inequality, oppression, or unintended harm that may be difficult to reverse once they become embedded in social and technological systems that shape how we live and relate to each other and the natural world that sustains us all. In the profound evolution of social consciousness, where the boundaries between tolerance and acceptance shift like morning mist across cultural landscapes, South Park's exploration of social movements and cultural change began with observations about how societies navigate the delicate balance between preserving traditional values and embracing progressive ideals, revealing insights about human nature, institutional adaptation, and the psychological dynamics that drive both social progress and reactionary resistance to change. The foundation of South Park's cultural movement predictions lies in their recognition that social change rarely occurs through linear progression, but rather through complex cycles of advancement, backlash, overcorrection, and gradual integration that reflect deeper tensions between competing values and worldviews within democratic societies. The show's understanding of how individual psychological development intersects with broader cultural transformation anticipated many of the patterns that would characterize contemporary debates about identity, inclusion, and the appropriate pace and scope of social reform. The most psychologically complex of South Park's social predictions emerged through their exploration of LGBTQ+ acceptance and the evolution from mere tolerance to genuine inclusion, using Mr. Garrison's personal journey as a lens for examining how individual identity formation both reflects and influences broader cultural attitudes toward difference, authenticity, and the relationship between personal freedom and social belonging. His transformation from closeted elementary school teacher to openly gay individual to transgender woman represents not only personal psychological development, but also society's evolving understanding of gender and sexuality as complex aspects of human experience that cannot be easily categorized or controlled through traditional social norms. The psychological dynamics underlying Garrison's identity exploration reveal the show's sophisticated understanding of how personal authenticity requires both internal self-acceptance and external social validation, creating tensions when individual identity development challenges existing social structures and expectations. His struggles with internalized shame, social rejection, and the pressure to conform to heteronormative expectations demonstrate how cultural attitudes toward difference can profoundly affect individual psychological health and development, while his eventual self-acceptance reflects broader patterns of how marginalized identities gain recognition and respect through sustained advocacy and cultural change. The specific mechanisms through which Garrison's identity becomes politicized and used for broader cultural debates reveal how individual experiences of difference often become symbolic battlegrounds for larger ideological conflicts about the nature of human identity, the appropriate role of government in regulating personal behavior, and the tension between individual autonomy and community standards. The transformation of personal identity into political statement reflects broader patterns of how cultural change occurs through the intersection of personal courage and collective advocacy. The educational context within which much of Garrison's identity development occurs demonstrates the show's understanding of how schools become crucial sites for cultural transmission and change. where evolving social attitudes must be balanced with parental expectations, institutional policies, and children's developmental needs. The challenge of creating inclusive educational environments that respect diverse identities while maintaining community support reveals the complex negotiations required for successful social change in democratic societies. The evolution of language and terminology surrounding LGBTQ+ identities reflects broader patterns of how social movements develop vocabularies and conceptual frameworks that enable both internal community building and external political advocacy. The increasing specificity and complexity of identity categories represents both progress in recognizing human diversity and potential sources of confusion or exclusion for individuals who may not fit neatly into available categories or who lack access to current terminology and cultural knowledge. The backlash and resistance that accompanies progress in LGBTQ+ acceptance demonstrates how social change inevitably generates anxiety and opposition from individuals and groups whose identity and status depend on maintaining traditional arrangements and hierarchies. The psychological investment that some people have in existing social orders creates predictable patterns of resistance that social movements must navigate while maintaining momentum for continued progress and avoiding polarization that could undermine broader public support. The emergence of PC Principal as a character represents South Park's recognition that progressive social movements can sometimes adopt tactics and attitudes that may be counterproductive to their own goals, creating new forms of rigidity and exclusion while attempting to address historical injustices and promote inclusion. The character's extreme approach to inclusive language and behavior modification reflects genuine concerns about how well-intentioned efforts to promote tolerance can become authoritarian in their implementation and alienating in their effects on potential allies and community members. The psychological dynamics of political correctness enforcement reveal how social movements must balance the need to challenge harmful language and behavior with the recognition that sustainable change requires persuasion and voluntary adoption of new norms, rather than coercive compliance that may generate resentment and backlash. The tendency for some progressive advocates to adopt punitive approaches to cultural change reflects understandable frustration with slow progress, while potentially undermining the collaborative relationships necessary for lasting social transformation. The specific tactics employed by PC Principal, including public shaming, mandatory education programs, and strict enforcement of language guidelines, anticipated real-world debates about appropriate methods for promoting inclusive environments in schools, workplaces, and public institutions. The episode's exploration of how institutional policies intended to promote inclusion can sometimes create new forms of anxiety and exclusion reveals the complexity of implementing progressive values through formal rules and procedures. The broader community response to PC Principal's leadership demonstrates how institutional change efforts must navigate competing constituencies with different levels of commitment to progressive values and different understandings of appropriate methods for achieving inclusive environments. The resistance and accommodation that emerge in response to his initiatives reflect broader patterns of how communities adapt to changing social expectations and institutional policies. The long-term consequences of extreme political correctness enforcement include potential backlash effects that may strengthen opposition to progressive values, while also creating genuine improvements in inclusive behavior, language use. The challenge of distinguishing between productive social pressure for improved behavior and counterproductive authoritarian control reflects ongoing tensions within progressive movements about appropriate strategies for achieving social change. The intersection of LGBTQ+ acceptance with broader questions of religious freedom, parental rights, and cultural autonomy creates complex challenges for democratic societies that must balance competing claims to dignity, respect, and self-determination. The tension between individual freedom to express authentic identity and community freedom to maintain traditional values requires ongoing negotiation and compromise that respects legitimate concerns on multiple sides while protecting vulnerable individuals from discrimination and harm. The second major component of South Park's cultural movement predictions emerged through their exploration of how professional sports organizations would be pressured to abandon team names and mascots that were increasingly recognized as examples of cultural appropriation and racial insensitivity, reflecting broader shifts in awareness about how seemingly neutral cultural symbols can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and historical injustices. The Cleveland Indians and Washington Redskins, naming controversies that the show anticipated years before they became major public issues, demonstrate their understanding of how cultural sensitivity evolves gradually through advocacy, education, and changing generational attitudes rather than sudden institutional recognition of problematic practices. The resistance that such changes encounter reflects genuine attachment to tradition and identity that must be acknowledged and addressed rather than simply dismissed as backward thinking or conscious prejudice. The psychological dynamics underlying attachment to traditional team names and symbols reveal how cultural identity formation becomes intertwined with commercial entertainment and community, belonging in ways that make change feel like personal loss rather than moral progress. The fans' investment in team tradition creates emotional stakes that extend beyond simple consumer preference to encompass memories, relationships, and sense of place that may be threatened by name changes, regardless of their moral necessity. The economic considerations that influence team name decisions demonstrate how cultural change often requires overcoming financial incentives that favor maintaining profitable status quo, arrangements over making costly changes for moral reasons. The challenge of quantifying economic losses from name changes versus reputational benefits from demonstrating cultural sensitivity reflects broader tensions between short-term financial considerations and long-term brand value and social responsibility. The Native American community responses to team name controversies reveal the complexity of representing diverse perspectives within affected populations and the importance of centering affected voices in decisions about cultural representation and appropriation. The variation in opinion within Native communities about the significance and harm of team names reflects broader patterns of how marginalized groups may have different priorities and strategies for addressing systemic issues. The media coverage and public debate surrounding team name changes demonstrate how cultural issues become politicized and used for broader ideological positioning rather than focused problem-solving that centers the experiences and concerns of affected communities. The transformation of specific cultural sensitivity issues into general debates about political correctness and cultural change reflects patterns that make productive dialogue and compromise more difficult to achieve. The third element of South Park's cultural movement predictions emerged through their exploration of how health, consciousness, and dietary trends would become markers of social identity and moral virtue, rather than simply personal health choices, creating new forms of social division and commercial exploitation that would transform food culture into sites of ideological conflict and lifestyle performance. The gluten-free movement's cultural significance extends far beyond medical necessity for individuals with celiac disease to encompass broader anxieties about food safety, corporate food production, and personal control over health outcomes in complex industrial food systems. The psychological appeal of dietary restrictions as solutions to diffuse health and wellness concerns reflects genuine needs for agency and understanding in contexts where individual consumers have limited information about food production, processes, and long-term health effects. The commercial response to health consciousness trends demonstrates how legitimate health concerns become opportunities for marketing, manipulation, and premium pricing that may not provide corresponding health benefits while creating new forms of consumer anxiety and status competition. The proliferation of specialized food products and dietary supplements reflects market incentives to capitalize on health fears rather than address underlying issues in food production and healthcare systems. The social dimensions of dietary choices reveal how food consumption becomes intertwined with identity, performance, and moral signaling in ways that can create judgment and division around personal choices that may have little bearing on individual character or social contribution. The tendency for health and environmental consciousness to become markers of social virtue creates pressure for performative consumption that may not reflect genuine commitment to health or environmental protection. The intersection of food culture with economic inequality demonstrates how health consciousness trends often become accessible primarily to individuals with sufficient economic resources and cultural capital to navigate complex information about nutrition and food production, potentially creating new forms of class distinction based on dietary sophistication and moral consumption choices. The relationship between healthy eating and economic privilege reveals how individual health choices cannot be separated from broader questions of social justice and economic opportunity. In the gentle recognition of these cultural movement prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that social progress requires navigating complex tensions between competing values and constituencies, while maintaining commitment to both individual dignity and collective flourishing. Their cultural predictions remind us that meaningful change requires patience, empathy, and willingness to engage with legitimate concerns and resistance rather than simply dismissing opposition as ignorance or prejudice, recognizing that sustainable social transformation depends on building broad-based support through persuasion and demonstration, rather than coercive enforcement that may undermine the very values that progressive movements seek to promote and protect. In the treacherous landscape of economic speculation and digital finance, where the promise of revolutionary wealth creation collides with the eternal patterns of human greed and mathematical reality, South Park's exploration of economic disasters and market predictions began with observations about how technological innovation would create new opportunities for both legitimate investment and sophisticated fraud, revealing timeless truths about human psychology, market dynamics, and the relationship between individual financial desperation and collective economic instability. The foundation of South Park's economic prophecies lies in their recognition that every technological advance creates new venues for the oldest forms of human exploitation and self-deception, where the complexity of new financial instruments serves primarily to obscure rather than eliminate fundamental risks, and where the promise of easy wealth continues to overcome rational analysis and historical awareness among investors who should know better. The show's understanding of how speculative bubbles form and burst anticipated many of the patterns that would characterize cryptocurrency markets and other digital financial innovations. The most psychologically penetrating of South Park's economic disaster predictions emerged through their early satirical treatment of digital economies and virtual currencies, where the gap between technological possibility and practical value would create massive opportunities for speculation, manipulation, and fraud that would attract both sophisticated criminals and ordinary individuals seeking escape from economic insecurity through magical thinking about technological solutions to structural economic problems. The specific mechanisms of cryptocurrency speculation that the show anticipated reveal their understanding of how digital scarcity can be artificially created and marketed to exploit fundamental human cognitive biases about value, rarity, and future potential. The transformation of computer code and digital tokens into investment vehicles worth thousands or millions of dollars demonstrates how speculative markets can become completely divorced from underlying economic reality when driven by psychological factors like fear of missing out, social proof, and the appeal of getting rich quickly without corresponding work or value creation. The psychological dynamics underlying cryptocurrency investment behavior reveal patterns that mirror traditional gambling addiction, religious devotion, and pyramid scheme participation, where rational analysis becomes subordinated to emotional investment in narratives about revolutionary change and early adopter advantage. The tendency for cryptocurrency enthusiasts to develop cult-like devotion to specific technologies and to dismiss criticism as ignorance or resistance to inevitable progress demonstrates how financial speculation can become intertwined with identity and worldview in ways that make objective evaluation practically impossible. The social media amplification of cryptocurrency promotion and speculation creates feedback loops where price increases generate excitement that attracts new investors whose purchases drive further price increases, creating artificial momentum that can persist until external factors or market saturation causes sudden collapse. The role of influencers and online communities in cryptocurrency markets demonstrates how digital platforms enable new forms of market manipulation that can operate at scales and speeds that traditional regulatory frameworks struggle to monitor or control. The environmental consequences of cryptocurrency mining and blockchain verification systems reveal how speculative financial activities can have massive real-world impacts that are rarely factored into investment decisions or market valuations. The energy consumption required for maintaining cryptocurrency networks represents a form of negative externality that privatizes profits while socializing environmental costs, creating misalignment between individual financial incentives and collective environmental responsibility. The regulatory challenges posed by cryptocurrency markets demonstrate how technological innovation can outpace institutional capacity to provide appropriate oversight and consumer protection, creating temporary legal and regulatory vacuums that enable fraud and manipulation, while leaving investors with limited recourse when losses occur. The global and decentralized nature of cryptocurrency systems complicates traditional approaches to financial regulation and law enforcement, while creating opportunities for regulatory arbitrage and jurisdiction shopping by bad actors. The intersection of cryptocurrency speculation with broader economic inequality creates situations where individuals facing financial stress become vulnerable to increasingly desperate investment strategies that promise escape from economic insecurity through participation in speculative bubbles that are more likely to worsen rather than improve their financial situations. The marketing of cryptocurrency investment as democratized access to wealth creation often targets communities that lack the financial education and resources necessary to evaluate such opportunities appropriately. The evolution of cryptocurrency markets, from experimental technology to mainstream investment vehicle, demonstrates how speculative bubbles can achieve temporary legitimacy through institutional adoption and media attention that may not reflect underlying economic fundamentals or long-term sustainability. The entry of traditional financial institutions into cryptocurrency markets provides credibility that can extend speculative bubbles while transferring risk from early adopters to retail investors and pension funds that may not fully understand the risks they are assuming. The second major component of South Park's economic disaster predictions emerged through their exploration of how corporate scandals and public relations crises would be managed in the digital age, where news travels instantly and public opinion can shift rapidly based on viral content and social media campaigns that may not reflect complete or accurate information about complex business situations. The speed of modern scandal propagation through social media and digital news platforms creates pressure for immediate corporate responses that may prioritize damage control over accurate information or appropriate corrective action. The 24-hour news cycle and constant demand for content creates incentives for media outlets to amplify controversy and speculation rather than conducting thorough investigation of complex business practices that may require expertise and time to evaluate properly. The consumer activism and boycott effectiveness that characterizes contemporary corporate accountability demonstrates how digital platforms enable rapid organization of consumer pressure campaigns that can have significant economic impact on companies regardless of whether the underlying complaints are proportionate to actual corporate wrongdoing. The democratization of corporate accountability through social media creates both opportunities for addressing legitimate grievances and risks of mob mentality and disproportionate punishment for relatively minor infractions. The cycle of outrage and forgiveness that characterizes contemporary corporate scandal management reveals patterns of public attention and memory that can be exploited by companies that understand how to weather initial criticism while implementing minimal changes that provide appearance of reform without addressing underlying problematic practices. The short attention span of digital media and social media users creates opportunities for corporate misconduct to be forgotten relatively quickly. If companies can avoid sustained negative attention, the economic costs of corporate scandal management include not only direct financial losses from boycotts and legal settlements, but also indirect costs from increased regulatory scrutiny, employee turnover, and reputational damage that may affect business relationships and market opportunities for years after initial incidents. The challenge of quantifying reputational damage and rebuilding trust creates ongoing costs that may exceed immediate financial penalties or settlements. The intersection of corporate accountability with broader political and cultural divisions creates situations where business practices become sites of ideological conflict rather than focus areas for specific problem solving and improvement. The politicization of corporate behavior makes it difficult to distinguish between legitimate accountability efforts and partisan attacks that may not serve constructive purposes for either consumers or businesses. The third element of South Park's economic disaster predictions emerged through their exploration of housing market dynamics and real estate speculation, where the commodification of basic shelter needs intersects with financial speculation and economic inequality to create affordability crises that affect entire communities and regions. The transformation of housing from shelter commodity to investment vehicle creates conflicts between the need for affordable housing for residents and the desire for property appreciation among owners and investors. The financialization of real estate markets enables speculation and price manipulation that can drive housing costs beyond the reach of local workers while generating profits for distant investors who have no connection to affected communities. The relationship between housing affordability and economic opportunity demonstrates how real estate markets affect labor, mobility, community stability, and intergenerational wealth transfer in ways that extend far beyond immediate housing policy to encompass broader questions of economic inequality and social mobility. The concentration of economic opportunity in regions with high housing costs creates barriers to employment and advancement that can trap individuals and families in economically depressed areas or force them to spend unsustainable portions of their income on housing expenses. The gentrification and community displacement patterns that result from real estate speculation and development demonstrate how market forces can destroy existing communities and social networks while creating neighborhoods that serve higher income residents but eliminate affordable housing and local businesses that previously served diverse populations. The loss of community character and social infrastructure through gentrification represents costs that are rarely factored into development decisions or market analyses. The role of government policy and zoning regulations in housing market dynamics reveals how political decisions about land use, development permissions, and infrastructure investment affect housing affordability and availability in ways that may not be visible to residents who experience only the final market outcomes. The intersection of local political control with regional economic forces creates complex governance challenges that require coordination across jurisdictions and policy areas. The environmental implications of housing development and sprawl patterns demonstrate how individual housing decisions aggregate to create regional environmental impacts, including habitat destruction, water resource depletion, and transportation-related emissions that affect air quality and climate change. The challenge of balancing housing affordability with environmental sustainability requires integrated planning approaches that consider long-term costs and benefits rather than focusing primarily on immediate development profits or housing construction. The demographic changes associated with housing market shifts affect school systems, local businesses, and community organizations in ways that can fundamentally alter the character and functionality of neighborhoods and regions. The displacement of long-term residents through rising housing costs breaks apart social networks and institutional knowledge that take decades to develop and cannot be easily replaced through new development or demographic changes. In the gentle recognition of these economic disaster prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that financial, innovation, and market dynamics, however promising they may appear for creating wealth and opportunity, inevitably interact with human psychology and institutional limitations in ways that can produce both beneficial outcomes and devastating consequences that may not be apparent until after significant damage has been done to individuals and communities who lack the resources and knowledge necessary to protect themselves from economic exploitation and market volatility. Their economic predictions remind us that sustainable prosperity requires not only innovation and market efficiency, but also appropriate regulation, consumer protection, and social safety nets that prevent the costs of economic experimentation and speculation from falling disproportionately on vulnerable individuals and communities who have little control over the broader economic forces that shape their opportunities and outcomes. In the vast theater of global politics, where the collision between domestic concerns and international realities creates cascading consequences that ripple across continents and generations, South Park's exploration of international relations and global events began with observations about how local political decisions and cultural anxieties would increasingly intersect with global security challenges, revealing profound insights about how terrorism, immigration, and international conflict would be shaped by entertainment media, political opportunism, and the complex psychology of fear-based decision-making in democratic societies. The foundation of South Park's international relations prophecies lies in their recognition that global events would become increasingly entangled with domestic political theater and entertainment culture, where serious security challenges and diplomatic relations would be filtered through media narratives and political positioning that often prioritize immediate tactical advantage over long-term strategic thinking and genuine international cooperation. The show's understanding of how foreign policy becomes domesticated and how international relations become vehicles for local political messaging anticipated many of the patterns that would characterize contemporary American engagement with global challenges. The most psychologically prescient of South Park's international predictions emerged through their portrayal of Osama bin Laden's death, where the intersection of entertainment culture and counter-terrorism operations revealed deep truths about how democratic societies process national security threats and how the boundary between justified military action and voyeuristic violence consumption becomes blurred when real-world conflicts are mediated through entertainment frameworks and social media spectacle. The specific circumstances surrounding the predicted assassination, with Special Forces commandos descending from the ceiling to execute bin Laden during what appears to be a ceremonial event, anticipated not only the tactical elements of the actual operation, but also the theatrical and symbolic dimensions that would make the killing a moment of national catharsis rather than simply military success. The episode's recognition that bin Laden's death would occur through dramatic military action rather than capture and legal prosecution reveals understanding of how counter-terrorism strategy would prioritize symbolic victory over procedural justice. The psychological dynamics underlying the public response to bin Laden's death demonstrate the show's sophisticated understanding of how democratic societies navigate the tension between civilized values and the desire for revenge against those who have caused massive harm and suffering. The celebration that follows the assassination reflects genuine relief and satisfaction, while also revealing darker impulses toward collective violence that may not be entirely consistent with democratic ideals and legal principles that normally govern state action. The role of entertainment media in processing and presenting the bin Laden killing reveals how real-world violence becomes transformed into narrative content that serves both informational and emotional functions for audiences who experience global events primarily through mediated representations rather than direct experience. The transformation of military operations into entertainment spectacle reflects broader patterns of how democratic societies relate to war and violence through consumption rather than direct participation. The long-term implications of the bin Laden killing for international relations and counter-terrorism strategy demonstrate how individual operations, however tactically successful, may not address underlying political and social conditions that generate terrorism and international conflict. The focus on eliminating specific leaders rather than addressing systemic issues reflects broader limitations in how democratic societies approach complex global challenges that require sustained engagement and institutional commitment, rather than dramatic military solutions. The intersection of counter-terrorism operations with domestic political positioning reveals how national security challenges become entangled with electoral considerations and partisan advantage seeking that may compromise strategic coherence and international cooperation. The tendency for foreign policy successes to be claimed by specific political leaders rather than credited to institutional capabilities and international cooperation, reflects patterns of political narcissism that may undermine effective, long-term strategy, development, and implementation. The international consequences of American counterterrorism operations, including effects on diplomatic relations, regional stability, and global perceptions of American power and legitimacy, demonstrate how individual military successes may create broader strategic challenges if they are not integrated into comprehensive political and diplomatic strategies that address root causes of conflict and instability. The focus on tactical victories over strategic coherence reflects broader American tendencies toward short-term thinking and military solutions to political problems. The second major component of South Park's international relations predictions emerged through their exploration of immigration, politics, and border security, where domestic anxiety about demographic change and economic competition would be channeled into political movements that prioritize symbolic gestures over effective policy solutions, creating humanitarian crises while failing to address underlying economic and social factors that drive population movement across international boundaries. The Canadian immigration crisis storyline that anticipated American immigration politics demonstrates the show's understanding of how immigration becomes a symbolic issue that represents broader anxieties about cultural change, economic insecurity, and national identity, rather than a practical challenge requiring technical solutions and international cooperation. The portrayal of mass migration from Canada as response to their own Trump-like political figure reveals how immigration patterns are often driven by political persecution and economic collapse, rather than simple preference for better economic opportunities. The psychological dynamics underlying immigration politics reveal how individual economic anxiety and cultural insecurity become channeled into collective scapegoating and policy proposals that may not address the actual causes of economic anxiety and social problems that create immigration pressure in the first place. The tendency to blame immigrants for problems that stem from broader economic and technological changes reflects cognitive patterns that prioritize simple explanations and identifiable targets over complex analysis and systemic reform. The wall-building obsession that characterizes both Canadian and American immigration politics in the show's portrayal reveals the psychological appeal of physical barriers as solutions to abstract social and economic challenges, where the construction of walls provides symbolic satisfaction and political messaging opportunities, while failing to address underlying issues that drive population movement and economic competition. The focus on border barriers rather than comprehensive immigration reform reflects broader political tendencies towards simple solutions to complex problems. The humanitarian consequences of immigration restrictions and border militarization demonstrate how policy decisions made for domestic political reasons can create massive suffering among vulnerable populations who lack political representation and advocacy within the countries that create restrictive polícies. The treatment of immigrants as political pawns rather than human beings with legitimate needs and rights reflects broader patterns of dehumanization that enable policy choices that would be unthinkable if applied to citizens and voters. The economic dimensions of immigration politics reveal how labor market dynamics and economic inequality create both demand for immigrant workers and resentment among native workers who face economic insecurity and declining opportunities. The failure to address underlying economic structures that create both immigration pressure and native worker anxiety leads to political conflicts that benefit employers and political opportunists while harming both immigrant and native working populations. The cultural dimensions of immigration politics demonstrate how demographic change challenges established cultural identities and social arrangements in ways that create genuine anxiety and loss among people whose communities and ways of life are transformed by population movements that they feel powerless to influence or control. The tension between cultural preservation and adaptation to diversity reflects broader challenges of maintaining social cohesion in rapidly changing societies. The international implications of immigration politics include effects on diplomatic relations with countries that are sources of immigrant populations and regional cooperation on economic development and security challenges that drive population movement. The tendency for immigration policy to be made unilaterally without consideration of effects on neighboring countries and international relationships reflects broader patterns of nationalist thinking that may undermine collective approaches to shared challenges. The intersection of immigration politics with broader questions of economic inequality and social mobility reveals how immigration becomes a focal point for anxieties about economic opportunity and social status that may not be directly related to immigration, but which lack other clear political channels for expression and resolution. The scapegoating of immigrants for broader economic and social problems reflects political dynamics that prioritize blame assignment over problem solving and policy effectiveness. The cyclical nature of immigration politics, with periods of intense focus followed by relative inattention, demonstrates how immigration issues become political tools that are activated during election cycles and periods of economic stress, rather than receiving consistent policy attention and long-term strategic planning. The episodic treatment of immigration as crisis rather than ongoing policy challenge reflects broader limitations in democratic systems' capacity to address complex issues that require sustained attention and gradual reform. The media coverage and public discourse surrounding immigration politics reveal how complex policy challenges become simplified into moral narratives and identity-based positioning that may not serve either effective policy development or genuine public understanding of immigration's costs and benefits for different communities and economic sectors. The polarization of immigration discourse makes compromise and evidence-based policy development more difficult, while providing opportunities for political mobilization and fundraising. In the gentle recognition of these international relations prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that global challenges and international relations, however complex and technical they may appear to policy experts, inevitably become entangled with domestic political dynamics and cultural anxieties that may not be directly related to the specific international issues at hand, but which shape public opinion and policy choices in ways that can produce outcomes that serve neither American interests nor global stability and cooperation. Their international predictions remind us that effective foreign policy requires not only strategic thinking and diplomatic skill, but also domestic political leadership that can help citizens understand how international engagement serves their legitimate interests while avoiding the temptation to exploit international challenges for short-term political advantage that may undermine both national security and global cooperation on shared challenges that require sustained multilateral effort to address successfully. In the delicate balance of planetary stewardship and human survival, where the intersection of individual behavior and collective action creates the conditions for either environmental catastrophe or sustainable flourishing, South Park's exploration of environmental and scientific awareness began with observations about how climate change would become both genuine existential threat and vehicle for political manipulation, revealing profound insights about how democratic societies struggle to address long-term challenges that require immediate sacrifice for uncertain future benefits. The foundation of South Park's environmental prophecies lies in their recognition that climate change and environmental degradation would become entangled with existing political and cultural divisions rather than generating the unified response that the scale and urgency of environmental challenges would seem to require. The show's understanding of how environmental science would be politicized and how corporate interests would exploit scientific uncertainty to delay meaningful action anticipated many of the patterns that would characterize contemporary environmental politics and policymaking. The psychological dynamics underlying climate change denial and skepticism reveal the show's sophisticated understanding of how cognitive biases and motivated reasoning interact with ideological commitments and economic interests to create resistance to scientific evidence that implies uncomfortable conclusions about necessary changes to economic and social systems. The tendency for individuals to reject information that challenges their existing beliefs and lifestyle preferences reflects deeper patterns of how human psychology responds to threats that seem too large and abstract to address through individual action. The specific mechanisms through which climate misinformation spreads and gains credibility demonstrate how scientific complexity creates opportunities for bad faith actors to exploit public uncertainty and lack of technical expertise to promote doubt and inaction that serves narrow economic interests rather than broader public welfare. The funding of climate denial by fossil fuel companies and other industries that benefit from existing energy systems reflects broader patterns of how corporate resources are deployed to influence public opinion and policy decisions through manipulation of information rather than legitimate scientific debate. The role of media coverage in shaping public understanding of climate science reveals how journalistic norms about balance and objectivity can be exploited to create false equivalencies between scientific consensus and fringe viewpoints, giving disproportionate attention to climate denial arguments that lack scientific credibility while undermining public understanding of the strength of evidence for human-caused climate change and its likely consequences. The intersection of climate activism with broader political movements and identity categories creates situations where environmental concern becomes associated with specific partisan positions rather than representing shared human interest in planetary survival and environmental health that transcends political divisions. The polarization of environmental issues makes collective action more difficult while providing opportunities for political mobilization and fundraising that may not translate into effective policy solutions. The corporate response to environmental activism and regulatory pressure demonstrates patterns of greenwashing and symbolic compliance that provide appearance of environmental responsibility while maintaining business practices that continue to contribute to environmental degradation. The gap between corporate environmental marketing and actual environmental performance reflects broader challenges in creating accountability systems that can distinguish between genuine environmental improvement and public relations. Strategies designed to deflect criticism without meaningful change. The psychological appeal of individual behavior change as response to environmental challenges reveals how the complexity and scale of environmental problems creates desire for personal actions that provide sense of agency and moral clarity, even when such actions may have minimal impact on overall environmental outcomes. The focus on individual responsibility for environmental problems may serve psychological needs, while potentially distracting from systemic changes that would be necessary to address environmental challenges effectively. The generational differences in environmental priorities and urgency reflect how long-term thinking and intergenerational responsibility create different perspectives on appropriate responses to environmental threats, with younger generations bearing more of the long-term costs of current environmental decisions, while having less political power to influence current policy choices. The tension between immediate economic needs and long-term environmental sustainability creates conflicts that democratic systems struggle to resolve through normal political processes. The economic interests behind environmental policy demonstrate how transitioning to sustainable economic systems requires overcoming powerful vested interests that benefit from existing arrangements while creating new economic opportunities that may not be immediately apparent or profitable. The challenge of managing economic transition in ways that protect workers and communities that depend on environmentally harmful industries requires policy, coordination, and social support that may exceed current institutional capabilities. The international dimensions of environmental challenges reveal how global problems require coordination among nations with different economic development levels, political systems, and environmental priorities, creating complex negotiation challenges that may not be resolvable through existing international institutions and diplomatic processes. The tendency for environmental agreements to be undermined by free rider problems and enforcement challenges reflects broader limitations in global governance systems. The second major component of South Park's environmental and scientific predictions emerged through their exploration of how scientific literacy and public education would become increasingly important for democratic decision-making, while simultaneously becoming more difficult to maintain in information environments characterized by competing authorities, commercial manipulation, and ideological polarization that makes objective evaluation of evidence challenging for ordinary citizens. The decline of expertise authority in public discourse reflects broader democratic tensions between specialized knowledge and popular sovereignty, where the technical complexity of contemporary challenges requires expert knowledge that may not be accessible to general public, while democratic legitimacy requires that policy decisions be subject to popular oversight and approval. The anti-intellectual tendencies that emerge during periods of social stress and political polarization create resistance to expert recommendations, even when such expertise is necessary for effective policy development. The role of educational systems in developing scientific literacy and critical thinking skills becomes increasingly crucial as citizens face complex information environments where they must evaluate competing claims about technical and scientific issues that affect their lives and communities. The challenge of teaching scientific thinking and evidence evaluation in ways that are accessible and relevant to diverse student populations requires educational approaches that may not be supported by existing institutional structures and political constituencies. The intersection of scientific education with religious and cultural values creates conflicts when scientific evidence challenges existing belief systems and worldviews, requiring educational approaches that can respect diverse perspectives while maintaining commitment to evidence-based understanding of natural and social phenomena. The politicization of scientific topics in educational settings reflects broader cultural conflicts about authority, truth, and the relationship between knowledge and values. The media's role in science communication reveals how complex technical information must be translated for general audiences through processes that may inadvertently distort or oversimplify scientific findings in ways that undermine public understanding while creating false confidence or inappropriate skepticism about scientific knowledge. The commercial pressures on media outlets to attract audiences through sensational or controversial content creates incentives for science. Reporting that emphasizes conflict and uncertainty rather than conveying accurate understanding of scientific consensus and evidence quality. The digital transformation of information access and sharing creates both opportunities for improved science communication and new challenges from misinformation and conspiracy theories that can spread rapidly through social media, platforms, and online communities. The democratization of information sharing enables individuals with limited scientific training to present themselves as authorities while undermining traditional gatekeeping mechanisms that previously filtered scientific information for public consumption. The psychological factors that influence how individuals evaluate scientific evidence reveal how cognitive biases, social pressures, and motivated reasoning affect scientific literacy, even among individuals with substantial education and intelligence. The tendency for people to seek information that confirms existing beliefs while avoiding information that challenges those beliefs creates echo chambers and information silos that make objective evaluation of scientific evidence more difficult. The economic dimensions of scientific research and development demonstrate how funding priorities and commercial interests shape which scientific questions receive attention and resources, while potentially distorting research priorities away from public interest toward private profit maximization. The increasing reliance on private funding for scientific research creates potential conflicts of interest that may affect research integrity while reducing public investment in scientific knowledge as public good. The international competition in scientific research and technological development creates pressures for rapid advancement that may compromise research quality and safety standards, while potentially undermining international cooperation on shared scientific challenges that require collaborative approaches. The nationalization of scientific achievement and technological capability reflects broader geopolitical tensions that may impede progress on global challenges. The intersection of scientific advancement with ethical and social considerations requires ongoing dialogue between scientific communities and broader public about appropriate uses of scientific knowledge and technology, particularly in areas like genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and environmental modification that may have far-reaching consequences for human society and natural systems. The complexity of ethical evaluation of scientific applications requires interdisciplinary approaches that may not be well supported by existing institutional structures. In the gentle recognition of these environmental and scientific awareness prophecies, we discover that South Park's creators understood that addressing environmental challenges and maintaining scientific literacy require not only technical knowledge and policy expertise, but also sustained public engagement and democratic institutions capable of making difficult decisions about long-term challenges that may require short-term sacrifice and behavior change. Their environmental and scientific predictions remind us that effective environmental protection and scientific progress depend on creating educational systems, media institutions, and political processes that can support informed democratic decision-making about technical issues, while resisting the temptation to exploit public uncertainty and scientific complexity for narrow political or economic advantage that PEMDA may undermine both environmental sustainability and scientific integrity in ways that compromise future generations' ability to address the challenges they will inherit from current policy choices and institutional arrangements. As we reach the end of our journey through South Park's uncannily accurate predictions, we find ourselves marveling at how satirical exaggeration, often reveals deeper truths about human nature and social trends. Matt Stone and Trey Parker's genius lies not in fortune-telling, but in recognizing the logical extremes of contemporary behavior and following those patterns to their inevitable conclusions. Their animated crystal ball worked because they understood that today's absurd comedy often becomes tomorrow's mundane reality. In a world that increasingly resembles their satirical universe, South Park's predictions remind us that the most effective social commentary doesn't just reflect what is, but illuminates what could be. Perhaps their greatest prediction of all is that no matter how strange reality becomes, human nature remains remarkably consistent in its capacity for both folly and wisdom. Sleep peacefully knowing that somewhere in a small Colorado town, satirical prophets continue watching our world with knowing smiles, ready to predict our next collective stumble into the future they've already imagined for us.